Hi folks, what we're looking at today is lesson number 49, standing waves. And the important thing about this section is that it brings together a lot of the other ideas that we've more recently been doing. And we're going to use that in order to be able to explain some things now that are a bit more complicated once we put all those little pieces together. So we're going to start with the very first thing being resonance. And this is going all the way back to the end of chapter 7. Resonance, remember, is just the idea that everything has a natural resonant frequency. And if we come along and we apply a forced frequency, we apply a force at the same frequency as the natural resonant frequency of that object, we can cause mechanical resonance. We can either keep it vibrating at that frequency, or we can even do things like increase the amplitude of its vibration. Second idea that's a little bit more recent is waves at boundaries. Now, waves at boundaries, there were all the different combinations we did, but specifically for standing waves to work, it has to be a situation where we're going from lower to higher density medium. So the significant thing there is that we have to remember that anytime we're going through a big density change, the wave is mostly reflected. But in addition to that, specifically for low to high density, we're going to get a reflected wave that is inverted. So if we send out a crest, then we will have a reflected trough, an inverted wave. And we're actually going to see even today that we're going to come up with another set of names to describe crests and troughs. I know it seems crazy, but it kind of fits in with what we're going to be seeing here. Now, in superpositioning, the very last thing that we did just before this section, the part that we have to remember is that anytime we have waves crisscrossing over each other, we can have interference. Specifically, for what we're going to be looking at here, we are looking very much at a reflected wave coming back at us as a trough, interacting with a brand new wave that I'm going to send out as a crest. So a crest is going to meet a trough at some point, and there's going to be a spot or multiple spots where there is destructive interference that's occurring. So thinking of the diagrams that we were doing previously when I was talking about sending out a wave pulse through the spring towards the door, I would be doing the exact same thing again. And so I'm sending out an incident wave pulse that is a crest. Remember, we can also use the term that we would say it is currently a wave pulse that is erect. So we're sending it out to the right towards the door. Now, at the moment it reaches the door, and I'm drawing this diagram for you to kind of show that it's almost like the pulse that I have here is about half the size of the length of the spring that I'm using. But that pulse reaches the door, and at this point it is still erect, it is still a crest. But at the moment that it hits the door and it reflects, it's going to reflect inverted. So that is my new reflected wave. Well, not new, but it's the reflected wave coming back at me. And the really wacky part that we have to think of is that as this wave pulse is reflecting back to me, it is at that moment that I generate a brand new incident pulse back where I'm holding the spring. And I'm going to make a new one that's a crest. So I have a crest that's moving away from me, the brand new one, and I have a trough that is coming back towards me. Now, if those two meet and they interact with each other doing superpositioning, they will interact in such a way that it'll cause destructive interference. Now, this is where some of the new names come in. Because if we think about where those two waves are going to meet, they're going to meet right in the middle. You can see that one in the middle that I've labeled a node. That's because a node is anywhere where destructive interference is happening, or we just don't expect to see wave motion. So that spot right in the middle, that's going to be where my red crest meets my blue trough, causing destructive interference. Now, technically, at the end where it's attached to the door, we're not going to see that shooting up or down either. So that is technically also a node. And then, and this is the part where it gets a little bit weird, on the far left, where I'm holding the spring, it's kind of a node. The reason why I say it's only kind of a node is because that's going to be where I'm holding the spring and I'd have to be flicking my wrist in order to make the new pulses. So obviously I'm adding energy at that point, but think of it as almost like in a perfect universe. If there was no energy lost in this, I could then just hold my hand there, hold it really tight, and this thing would just kind of keep going on its own. Now, I also have the part labeled at the top and the bottom, the top of the crest and the bottom of the trough, that I've labeled as antinodes. Now, the deal with those is that they are the areas of maximum movement, most amplitude. So on the left-hand side, where I've got a crest right now, I've got a maximum amplitude happening in that moment. And the same thing is true on the right-hand side for the blue trough. At that antinode, it is the maximum amplitude for that trough at that moment. But here's the really crazy thing that we have to consider, is that when these waves pass through each other, there's that moment where there will be destructive interference and it's just completely flat, although we never really quite see that because it happens for the smallest moment of time in everything we see. But then we have to consider that just a fraction of a moment later, the red crest is now on the right-hand side and the blue trough is on the left-hand side. So to take this back again for just a moment, this is what we had set up with the blue trough coming reflected back to me and the brand new red crest going away from me. They crisscross and go through each other. And the whole idea of superpositioning is they cause no permanent damage, so they just end up on the opposite sides now, and it looks like this. But what's the red one going to do? Well, it's going to hit the door, and it's going to get flipped inverted. And on the other side, where I'm holding the spring, I'm going to flick it back up again. So I create another crest on the left side, and the reflected trough coming back on the right is coming back towards me. So what we basically get is, and this is going to be where it becomes sort of like a flip book for a moment, blip, 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 blip. We get this bouncing sort of motion. You might remember when I was shaking the spring in class, I did something that I said was going to be called a standing wave, and that's what I was showing you, this idea of them passing through each other and doing kind of this up, down, up, down, up, down kind of motion. Now, this just keeps on going as long as I keep flicking the spring where I'm holding it in order to continue it. But it doesn't have to be just me with a spring. In a weird way, and again, it's not transverse waves, they're truly longitudinal waves because they're sound waves. This same sort of thing happens even in things like musical instruments. And that's going to be something that we look at in a later lesson. But we're going to use this idea of standing waves within like a trumpet or a flute or something like that to show how they can continue to do this bouncy, bouncy, bounce sort of thing. Now, this would be called a double standing wave because we can see like two distinct parts. There's the up down on the left, there's the up down on the right. So that's a double standing wave. At some point in class, I'll try to demonstrate this again for you. But for now, what I do have for you is a video from a million years ago. Yes, that's me when I had hair, and I'm sorry that it is from many years ago, and the video quality is not so great, but let me have a chance here to kind of show you a little bit of what the standing waves can look like. Now, the most significant thing that I'd want you to notice from that is that when I was doing the triple, I had to increase the frequency I was shaking my hand at. The forced frequency I'm putting in has to increase. I'm shaking it faster. What happens is that as the frequency increases, and that's purposefully me doing that, the velocity in that spring stays the same. So the wavelength correspondingly has to shrink smaller. Anyways, that's the whole game for all of standing waves. Hope you have a good day.